Joined by Femi Abebefe, VSiN host, former co-host of yours, Wes Reynolds. And he's going to be on the show with us Thursday night. Michael Lombardi and Femi Abebefe live from the South Point. We're going to be here at Circa, so we have wall-to-wall draft coverage on the NFL on Thursday night. Femi, thanks for coming on tonight. I want to know how many bets you have in your pocket or on your app, let's say, on the draft as we sit 2 days away.
I appreciate you guys having me. It's I'm not used to doing shows this late anymore, so it's nice to kind of do the nightcap here a little bit here. But no, thank you guys for having me on. But it's funny because this draft, especially, I mean, you guys are out here in Nevada as well. There hasn't been a lot to pick from over these last couple of months. So I've honestly, my whole goal with this draft has been just invested in the number one overall pick market. Now, I'm heavily invested in Bryce Young. I had some sprinkles on Anthony Richardson from back in December. I had some Will Levis 16-1 way back in October during the college football season. And then I had a little bit of CJ Stroud after the combine. But really over these last, I would say, 6-7 weeks, all of my bets have been placed on Bryce Young to go number one overall. So it was really fun to wake up to that weird Reddit post this morning. I had about a 15-minute scramble there, but I think we cooled off a little bit, knowing that it's probably somebody just making something up. At least hopefully they're making something up, and Bryce Young gets his name called first on Thursday.
All right, so if you're watching this show right now on VSiN, you can see Femi's over at Dave Ross's apartment because he's got the Dallas Cowboys blanket back there. Like, what the hell's going on? You're a Cowboys fan too?
It's America's team. I was born down there, so I was like, I had no choice pretty much, Even though I grew up in the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest, but my dad, my brother, they're all Cowboy fans. So, it was either like the Cowboys or don't like football. And how can you not like football?
Well, I thought you were a Seahawks. So you do a lot of shows with Michael Lombardi, by the way, and he's been saying this is a one quarterback draft, and that's Bryce Young, who's going to go number one. We assume, we hope so, on Thursday night. How many quarterbacks do you think will go in the first round? Are you buying Hendon Hooker in the first round? That prop is going to go over 4.5.
A lot of people have been talking about that, and I just can't get there. I can't get there with Hendon Hooker going in the first round. I understand the whole fifth-year option deal and how you want to get that quarterback on that cost-controlled kind of a contract there. It helps in terms of team building, but I think when you actually just watch the tape and also factor in how old Hendon Hooker is, I mean, he's 25 years old. Heck, Trey Lance, who's about to enter his third year in the NFL, he's 23 years old. So if you want a quarterback, why don't we go ahead and get Trey Lance instead of going and drafting Hendon Hooker in the first round? But he's 25, about to turn 26 in December. He's coming off the torn ACL. Now, according to reports, it sounds like he's ahead of schedule with that ACL rehab, but he's still kind of behind the eight ball coming off of an injury and making that next step to the next level here. So I don't really buy it. I don't think this is a draft where these quarterbacks are loved. I mean, I think we do this every single year, especially in the back half of the first round, where people talk themselves into, so-and-so might sneak in. Last year, it was Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis. I mean, years past, it's been Drew Lock. Years past, it's been Mason Rudolph. And we talk about these guys as if somebody's going to take a chance. And ultimately, especially in the back half of the first round, those teams are really good, which means they're typically pretty smart. And I don't think smart teams reach for substandard quarterbacks. So I don't really see it. I'm going to go against the grain. I know that the movement has been heavily toward over 4.5 QBs. If I had to play it, I think I'd play that under. I think we only see 4 guys go on Thursday.
So, Femi, with you believing 4 quarterbacks going in the first round, are one of them going to your old stomping grounds in Seattle? They're sitting there at number 5. Geno Smith obviously had a very good year. But, eventually you got to look and see, okay, we got to get a young quarterback. But is this the time for them to do it? It seems like perhaps Anthony Richardson, maybe CJ Stroud, if the drop is to be believed, are going to be there available for Seattle at 5 should they choose to do so.
I think they're going to take a quarterback on Thursday, but I'm not sure if it's going to happen at pick 5. They do have 2 first-round picks. They have a pick at 20. And just when I've been kind of doing the exercise, I don't do a whole lot of mock drafts, but I've done the exercise a couple times in the top 10 just to see, all right, how is this going to really play out? Because somebody is going to be left without a chair once those 10 picks are called off the board there. And I think that Richardson and Stroud are 2 guys who, unless teams trade into that top 10, could see themselves fall outside of that top 5, which opens the door for a Seattle. And John Schneider, he loves to trade on draft day. Typically, he loves to trade down, the general manager of the Seattle Seahawks. But in this instance, when they're trying to secure that quarterback of the future, because Geno Smith's contract, even though they got that extension, there's ways that they can kind of out of that without having too much of a dead cap hit. I think they're going to try to get out of this draft with their quarterback of the future. And no better player than Anthony Richardson, who you mentioned, Wes, is a guy that can kind of sit behind Geno Smith, can kind of develop in that culture in Seattle and not feel rushed to have to play. Because Richardson, I think the worst thing that would happen is if you went to a team that absolutely needs a quarterback to play from day one. Sometimes general managers and the owners, they're not going to be as patient. I believe that Seattle, because they have so much security with John Schneider and Pete Carroll, they've won for a number of years. They can be patient with Richardson. I think that'd be a great place for him to fit. Maybe it's the Seahawks taking that 20th pick and maybe a mid-round pick or so, or maybe the pick in next year and moving up if Richardson were to fall to 14 or 15, somewhere around that range. But I think that Richardson to Seattle would make a lot of sense, and I do think it makes even more sense for the Seahawks to take a QB Thursday.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at Peter King's mock draft, and Peter King's got sources all throughout the league, obviously. I don't think his mock drafts have traditionally been real accurate, but today he put one out, and he's got Hendon Hooker going 12. He's got Anthony Richardson going 23. So I'm not sure if the Seahawks are going to take – I think Richardson's going to drop maybe to the Falcons or 8 or all the way out of the top 10. I do think he's falling. Because there's not many teams that can afford to sit him for 2 years and develop a quarterback. And I think the Seahawks are one, but do they want to take Richardson at 5? Probably not. How about running backs? Are you buying that Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama is going to move into the back half of the first round and that we could see 2 running backs in the first round over that prop number of 1.5?
Maybe I'm a sucker, but I think I'm buying it. I'm buying this one because this draft and the way that people have described it is that every general manager, these guys have been talking to the GMs, all the insiders and stuff. They said that everyone is saying there's about 15 max true first round grades. So this is a draft where it's a little bit weaker than we've had in years past. It's kind of a little bit like last year's draft where there weren't any quarterbacks. This year's draft, there's quarterbacks, but we're all in love with only one of them. And the rest of the players, whether offensive skill guys, aren't really that explosive or are not guys who are going to be difference makers, at least early on in their careers. I think we do get 2 running backs because Gibbs, you've already heard the comparisons people are making to Alvin Kamara. He's that kind of dual threat running back where he can run the ball, obviously, but also catch the ball out of the backfield, which is what is most valuable for these running backs here. It's like, can you be a threat in the passing game? Bijan Robinson can do that. That's why he's probably going to go in the top 15, maybe even top 10, the running back out of Texas. But Gibbs also kind of fits that mold as well as being a runner and a pass catcher. I could see one of those teams that is a playoff caliber team say, hey, this is a guy that can add some extra juice to our offense, not really put us over the edge, but just make us a little bit more explosive and almost kind of add another dimension to an offense there. So Gibbs, who was terrific at Alabama, I could see easily going into the first round. I would play over 1.5 running backs because I don't think there's enough players to push those guys out. I mean, otherwise you're going to be reaching on edge rusher number 6 or cornerback number 4. And those guys aren't rated as highly as some of these playmaking runners like Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. So over 1.5 would be something I'd look into.
Femi, this is a good wide receiver draft, but it's a good wide receiver draft on day 2 and day 3, in the second and third round. A lot of little small slot guys that are very good, but not a lot of class at the top here in 2023. Who do you think's the first receiver off the board, and where do you think that receiver goes?
This has been the market that I've been thinking about the most that I've yet to bet, because wide receivers, I always liken it to what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, because these teams, they prefer different things. Some like the big fast guys, some like the possession receivers, some like the slot guys. It just ultimately depends on which teams feel the need to take a wide receiver at that point. And I would be looking honestly to fade Jackson Smith and Jigba. The time to bet him was prior to the combine, before he did the 3-cone and had like a 6.5 3-cone, one of the quickest 3 cones ever. Now, he didn't run the 40 because I don't think he wants to expose the lack of vertical speed, but he did do the agility stuff, which he fared really well. And we all know what he's capable of on the football field 2 years ago when he was with Ohio State. Didn't play as much this past season due to the injury. But I would look to kind of fade Smith and Jigba because minus 350, minus 400, wherever he's at right now, that's just way too high. Zay Flowers out of Boston College. Some people, and I think this is a little bit crazy, some people have compared him to kind of an Antonio Brown who has his head on straight. I think that's going a little far. If you just remove what Antonio Brown was and you just look at what he did as a football player, he was a Hall of Famer on the field, probably not going to get there, but I think that's a little bit lofty of a comparison. But I think also Quentin Johnston out of TCU. could be a guy because he's the only one that probably fits that X receiver, that big guy who can play on the outside. One of those guys, either Johnston or Flowers, would be who I would bet. Maybe it's Flowers. He's been on the circuit all over the place, making a number of top 30 visits here. That could be a guy around that plus 600, plus 550 range to go first wide receiver selected. But I would definitely take a look at fading Smith and Jigba because wide receivers that don't really run fast don't typically hear their names called first.
Yeah, I've got him over 12.5 on the draft position. Femi Abebefe with us, VSiN host, Dallas Cowboys superfan, best friend of Dave Ross. And he's going to be on the draft show with us on Thursday night, he and Michael Lombardi. All right, last minute here. What do you think the Seahawks do at number 5? And I've heard a lot of talk, well, they're only going to take high-character guys, so they're not going to take Jalen Carter, defensive tackle from Georgia. Do you think the Seahawks take Carter or pass?
I think they're going to pass on Jalen Carter. I just think that the way that they had that draft last year where they focus on those high character guys and they knocked that draft out of the park, I think they're going to go back to the well looking for guys who they can trust to come in, work hard, not have any issues. And I think that Will Anderson's going to fall into their lap at number 5, the Alabama edge rusher. I think that's an area of need. And he also is a high character guy. Nick Saban's talked about how he's one of his favorite players who he's ever coached. So I would expect Will Anderson, if he's at 5, the Seahawks will turn that card in.
Well, I hope the Texans take him at 2. I've got 3-1 odds and 5-1 odds on Will Anderson to go with the 2 pick, and I've got him under 3.5. So hopefully that's the case. But if he's there at 5, I do think the Seahawks would take him in a second.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.